Between the 23rd minute and the 29th minute, something stopped working, not gradually, not piece by piece, all at once. The ground underneath the Mineirazo didn't shake, the players didn't vanish, the ball kept moving, but 4 goals in 6 minutes was enough to shatter the narrative of an entire nation watching from the stands. Brazilian television cut to the crowd. Grown men held their heads like witnesses to an accident. No one was running anymore. No one was shouting. They were watching it happen, and there was nothing left to do but watch. This is football untold. This is the story of the Mineirazo. Brazil 1, Germany 7. Brazil had won the World Cup 5 times. No nation had done it more. They had hosted the tournament twice before and won it both times. The 2014 World Cup was supposed to belong to them. Neymar was 22 years old, the most magnetic talent on the planet, a player whose dribbling could break a team apart. Thiago Silva was the captain, the spine of the defense, the leader who'd carried Brazil to the Copa America and the Olympics. But between the quarterfinal and the semifinal, both of those men vanished. In the quarterfinal against Colombia, a Colombian defender threw a knee into Neymar's back. It fractured his vertebra. No surgery could fix the timing. No rehabilitation could bring him back for what came next. Thiago Silva picked up a second yellow card in that same run, cynical fouls that accumulated into a one-match suspension. So Brazil entered the semifinal on July 8, 2014, without the 2 men who'd carried them, playing at home, in front of 3 million supporters. Before kickoff, the Brazilian players held up Neymar's shirt during the national anthem. Some pundits later called it a funeral before the death. Luiz Felipe Scolari was the coach. He'd won the World Cup with Brazil in 2002. He understood what it meant to lead that team, in that place, in front of those people. He'd prepared for the semifinal against Germany as thoroughly as any coach could. Germany had Bastian Schweinsteiger, a midfielder with the kind of intelligence that meant he knew where the ball would be before it arrived. They had Manuel Neuer in goal, a goalkeeper who'd redefined his position. They had Mario Klose, a striker who'd been climbing toward the World Cup's all-time scoring record for a decade. Ronaldo held it, 15 goals, Klose had 14. Brazil had David Luiz stepping up as captain in Thiago Silva's place. He was a good defender, capable on set pieces, known for his aggression and commitment. But he wasn't Thiago Silva. No one was. By the end of the night, his marking would be described as a crime scene. The first goal came in the 11th minute. Müller got his head to a corner kick, completely unmarked, and sent the ball into the net. It wasn't shocking. Germany had already probed the defense, but it should have been a reset. Brazil should have steadied. Instead, they waited. Minute 23, Mario Klose, unmarked again in the center of the box. The ball came from the wing and Klose finished it. In doing so, he became the World Cup's all-time leading goal scorer. 15 goals, then 16. He did it in Brazil, against Brazil, on the biggest stage possible. For a moment, the Mineirazo crowd didn't fully register what they'd witnessed. Ronaldo was somewhere in that stadium, watching his own legacy pass to another man. Minute 24, Cruz. Minute 26, Cruz again. The German midfielder scored twice in 120 seconds. Brazil's defense had stopped communicating. Fernandinho gave the ball away 25 meters from goal. The German forwards turned and ran. By the time Cruz was celebrating his second goal, the Mineirazo had become something between a stadium and a church. The applause stopped. The songs stopped. What remained was a kind of sarcasm, the crowd's way of saying we see what's happening now. Minute 29. Khedira walked the ball into the net through a space where a defense should have been. 5-0 after 29 minutes. 4 goals in 6 minutes. The record didn't exist yet because nothing like this had happened before. Brazilian television showed the stands. A man in a Brazil shirt held a replica of the World Cup trophy. He began to cry, not in anger, but in the kind of grief that only comes when something you thought was permanent gets taken away in real time, broadcast to every nation on earth. Grown men sat in silence. Some left. Most stayed because leaving would have been an acknowledgement that this was real. The crowd began doing something extraordinary. They applauded the German passing moves, not mockingly, with a kind of surrender. They cheered when Schweinsteiger completed a pass. They called Olé at the Mineirazo like it was a training ground, not a stadium where their own team was collapsing. They were watching their own team die, and they were courteous enough to applaud the funeral. In the German dressing room at half-time, something unexpected happened. The players who'd just torn through the defending hosts agreed amongst themselves not to continue, not to score the 8th or 9th or 10th, to play the second half with restraint, to win without destroying. But Schürrle scored in the 69th minute anyway, then again in the 79th. Oscar got one in the 90th minute. The final scoreline was 7-1. The score entered the language as the Mineirazo, the Mineiro earthquake. In 1950, Brazil had lost to Uruguay in the final of a World Cup held in Brazil. That loss was called the Maracanazo, but that was 2-1. That was close enough to be rebuilt from. This was not. Brazil's first competitive home defeat since 1975 had just happened. A 62-match run had ended, not in the final, not in a quarterfinal where the team could regroup. In the semifinal, at home, in front of the nation, every Brazilian alive would remember where they were when this happened, what room they were sitting in, what they said to the people around them, whether they kept watching or turned it off. Germany went to the final and beat Argentina 1-0. It was almost anticlimactic after what had happened in Belo Horizonte. Brazil played the Netherlands in the third-place match and lost 3-0. They'd come to their own World Cup as 5-time champions and left it broken. Scolari would later describe that night as the worst day of his life. David Luiz cried in the post-match interview. His hands trembled. He'd carried the armband for 90 minutes, and what he carried was the weight of 62 years. The shirt Neymar wore was still hanging somewhere in the dressing room. The captain stood with his hands on his head. There was no explanation large enough for what had just occurred. Neymar watched from somewhere with a brace on his back. Thiago Silva watched from suspension. They would both have great careers, Neymar at Paris, Thiago Silva across Europe's best clubs, but they would never again play in a World Cup where Brazil was a credible favorite to win it. Brazil has not won a World Cup since 2002. Not since then. 2 decades now. 2 decades of tournaments where they were strong, where they had world-class players, where the history suggested they should win. Nations survive losing. Every nation that's competed at a World Cup has lost. Some have lost badly. What broke Brazil wasn't the final score. It was watching it happen in slow motion, at home, with no way to look away. It was the 62-year streak collapsing in minutes. It was watching the German team simply be better. It was the applause for the opposition. It was the man with the replica trophy crying into it like a child. If stories about the moments that crack nations in two are why you love football, subscribe, and we'll find the next untold story together. You cannot rebuild a nation in a night. You cannot even understand what broke in a night. Only look back and trace the moment it started. July 8, 2014, a corner kick, 4 goals in 6 minutes, a defense that stopped existing, a crowd that learned the word Mineirazo because no other word was large enough. Some stories end at full time. This one never did.